Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, motorists in Tunisia face disruption and long queues after the country struggled with days of petrol shortages. The nation was already facing a shortfall in several other staples. The government blamed some of the chaos on hoarders. Also, the diamond magnate who swept to victory in legislative elections in Lesotho over the weekend confounds expectations to announce that he's formed a three-party coalition government. And developing countries call for more funding for the program that allows crucial grain and food to be safely exported out of ports in Ukraine's war zone. About 13% of shipments under the Black Sea Grain Initiative have so far headed to Africa, many to parts of the continent where millions face the prospect of famine. But first, drivers in Tunisia have faced long queues at petrol stations after the country struggled with days of fuel shortages. The nation was already facing a shortfall in several other staples. The government's denied that a crisis in public finances has meant that it's struggling to pay importers for essential goods. Caroline Lamboulay has more.
After months of grappling with food shortages, Tunisians are now forced to queue to get petrol. Even when they find some, they can only fill up their tanks with around 13 litres.
The fuel shortage is really affecting me. When I get up in the morning, all I can think about is how am I going to fill my car up? I can't think of anything other than how am I going to get myself to work and drop off my wife and kids.
Our work has stopped. All our lives have stopped. Everything is disrupted. I've been waiting for an hour to get fuel at this petrol station.
The country's energy minister had promised that the shortage would end on Monday, as a fuel tanker docked in the coastal city of Bizerte. She cited global distribution problems, but she also said the shortages were being caused by consumers taking more fuel than they need. It's an argument that's been made before. Tunisian President Kais Saied has blamed hoarders and speculators for shortages of other staple goods. Essentials such as flour, vegetable oil, sugar, and even bottled water have become scarce commodities. With inflation at a record high, many cannot afford to buy these products, even when they do reappear on the shelves.
Now, the diamond magnate who swept to victory in legislative elections in Lesotho over the weekend has confounded expectations and announced that he's formed a three-party coalition government. There had been fears that the kingdom would remain politically gridlocked after Sam Matekane's breakthrough with the Revolution for Prosperity Party, which he founded just 6 months ago. He was just 5 seats short of an absolute majority, and on Tuesday said that he'll now be working with the Alliance of Democrats and Movement for Economic Change, who won 6 and 5 seats respectively. Many of Matekane's supporters are hoping for a political sea change.
People are craving for development. People are craving for change.
I have a lot of hope. They felt that the people who are already in government, or the people who were in government, the past government, didn't do anything for them. I also feel that way. I feel that whoever comes in, as long as it's people who went around before, maybe they'll bring us something new.
Every other person we elect into power, we hope for change, we hope for service delivery, we hope, and that's what we're doing right now.
Now, UN member states have backed calls from developing nations and the Secretary General for $3.5 million more of funding for the program that allows crucial grain and food to be safely exported out of ports in Ukraine's war zone. It was agreed in July between Turkey, the Kremlin, and Kyiv after Russia's invasion of Ukraine devastated global food supplies. The Black Sea Grain Initiative, though, still hasn't been granted its own budget. About 13% of shipments so far have headed to Africa, many to the Horn of Africa, where millions face the prospect of famine. For more on this, I'm joined now by Amir Abdullah, who's the UN's coordinator for the Grain Initiative. Amir, thanks so much for making the time to speak to me tonight. First of all, how much of a tangible impact have shipments made to Africa so far?
Well, good evening. The shipments have made a huge impact globally in helping to reduce prices. And for many in Africa who struggle to purchase their food, the fact that food prices have come down, staple foods especially, made a huge impact. In addition, the grains, as you mentioned, there was 13% of the commodities have gone to Africa. A lot of that was wheat, so it was a staple cereal, and that increased availability. So you had an increased availability, prices lowered, and that meant that it wasn't just the prices or the availability of product that came in from the Black Sea grain. It meant prices of globally that African countries could either procure, and in fact in some instances we found that traders who'd been hoarding grain in some warehouses in parts of Africa now released it into the market because the prices were starting to drop. So it's helped people with their food source.
But has it gone far enough, bearing in mind just the scale of the prospect of famine in parts of the continent? Should Africa have been made, or should Africa be made more of a priority in terms of the where the shipments that do make it through are directed to?
Well, basically the corridor had opened. The grain initiative was to get the corridors open. However, market forces determine where the commodities are going. It was very much a commercial enterprise, and so market forces determined where the food would go. And I think it does reveal that there should be a way for equity to help Africa and African countries with their purchasing power. Quite a few of these shipments, of course, one doesn't want to be in a situation where food assistance or food aid and potential famine is there. But the United Nations has been able to procure food in Ukraine and ship it, particularly to the Horn of Africa. So there has been, food directed to Africa. One would hope that more would get there, but it is going to be largely driven by economics and market.
Bearing that in mind, has it been difficult getting vessel operators to sign up for a trip to an active war zone?
It was quite difficult at first. In fact, when the initiative started, we almost had what seemed like a trickle of ships, and they were, to be very honest, quite much on the older side of ships and what one would refer to sometimes as tramp vessels. But as the confidence grew, as we got more and more ships operating up and down the corridor, and with so far, fortunately, no incidents, confidence grew, and more ships, newer ships, larger ships, started joining the initiative. And in fact, now we have a significant number of ships that are basically in line to be inspected and go into Ukraine, load and come out and be inspected. So it was difficult at first, but as the confidence grew, it became easier, and we got more ships and newer ships.
And so the initial initiative was only greenlit for about 120 days, meaning that's due to end in about mid-December. What are the current prospects of an extension?
Actually, it's even sooner than that. It's mid-November that it will end. And it really, that is, in shipping terms, that's around the corner. So we really do need to get an extension to this initiative. This initiative has lowered food prices globally, lowered them significantly in Africa, helped with the availability of food around the world, but very much also in Africa. So we do need to get it extended. There is benefit in this to all the parties. So one hopes that even given the current rise in tension of the conflict, that both parties will see the benefit to them, but the benefit to the global community. And don't forget that we also want to start not only moving food along this corridor, but it should be ammonia for fertilizer. And Africa needs fertilizer in copious quantities, because Africa's own crops, Africa's own produce, Africa's own agricultural harvests are going to be reliant on them getting significant quantities of fertilizer at appropriate prices. So it's really critical to keep this initiative going.
Thank you very much. Amir Abdullah, the UN's coordinator for the Black Sea Grain Initiative, speaking to us there from Ankara. Now, whilst in France on his 6-day tour, Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo was presented this week with an honorary degree from the prestigious Paris Sorbonne University. The award was in recognition of his democratic work in his homeland, including his focus on education and leadership in the fight against COVID-19. Now, this is the fourth honorary doctorate degree to be conferred upon the president. In discussing his pride in his country's democratic credentials, Akufo-Addo condemned Russia's aggression of Ukraine. Now, a new exhibition at the British Museum in the UK tells the remarkable story of the deciphering of the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. More than 240 objects chart the journey from early failed attempts to understand the mysterious symbols to correspondence between Thomas Young and Jean-François Champollion, the Frenchman who finally cracked the code in 1822. Take a look.
For a long time, hieroglyphs were considered symbols. They were considered to have magical meanings, to contain secret knowledge. And this was a perception that really lived on through the Middle Ages, through the Renaissance, and actually well into the 17th century. And the decipherments really made us understand that hieroglyphs, although they look like pictures, they represent a spoken language. So we could suddenly read a lot of the written material that the ancient Egyptians left behind, little scribbles on pieces of papyrus, but also monumental hieroglyphs on tomb walls, on temple walls. And we could suddenly have an insight into what people were thinking, how they were experiencing the world. We could read their shopping lists, their love poetry, their literature, and also monumental inscriptions, of course. So it really unlocked an entire civilization for us.
Picture says 1,000 words. Well, that is, though, all we have time for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
The history of our world is ever-changing. The flow of information is constantly increasing. We cover all subjects. We verify. We commit. On the ground, in all circumstances, to anticipate the future by understanding the present. We are with you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. France 24, an alternative look at the news.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.